Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have returning our good friend, Sean Esbjörn-Hargens. And Sean is a global leader in the application of integrative thinking to leader development and organization design. For the last decade, he has worked with a variety of mainstream and progressive mission-driven companies. In 2011, he founded Meta Integral, a social impact network that supports change leaders around the world in applying integrative principles. In 2018, he founded the Exo-Studies Institute, through which he is joining others in pioneering the field of exo-studies, which takes an integral approach to anomalous phenomena, including UAPs. Sean combines a strong academic background in the philosophy of science, and integrative meta-theories, with an open-hearted exploration of the mysteries and multi-layered nature of reality. Sean has also been a long-term practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, Diamond Heart, Celtic Christianity, as a result of his keen interest in translineage transformation and comparing contemplative traditions. He has published and edited numerous articles, chapters, and books. With that, you have meta theory for the 21st century and Dancing with Sophia, integral philosophy on the verge. His most recent article on non-human intelligence can be accessed here. It's called Our Wild Cosmos. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description. Sean is the Dean of Integral Education at the California Institute of Human Sciences, where he also serves as program director for the MA PhD program, Integral Noetic Sciences. So welcome, Sean.
Great. Awesome. Good to be back, James. Happy to dive in and explore. Let me just add a few things to that bio just to give folks kind of a felt sense of kind of the main areas that I kind of hang out in. So you mentioned at the end there with the bio, that I'm the program director of the, master's and PhD program in Integral Noetic Sciences. And essentially that's a scientific approach to the study of consciousness. So we use mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative approaches to looking at consciousness. And in that program, I'm so happy to announce that we just recently got approved a concentration in UAP and consciousness studies, right? So this is the first accredited graduate program on the planet, as far as I know, that is supporting graduate students to do work at the intersection of UAP studies and consciousness. We also have a concentration in anomalous studies, looking at all the kind of weird experiences that we have as human beings. And we also have a concentration in wisdom design, which is the application of integrative theories and maps to, leadership, organization design, project initiatives, and so forth. And then I also do exo studies, which is kind of my meta map for looking at the UAP topic in a large paranormal context and, kind of looking at psychological, scientific, and sociological dimensions of the phenomenon, right? Trying to engage the phenomenon from kind of all angles. And, my paper on Our Wild Cosmos is kind of a, gives people kind of an initial sense of how I'm approaching that. And in combination with the academic work and the exo studies work, I've recently launched the Super Experiencer Research Project. And there we're looking at, people who have noetic and anomalous experiences across multiple domains. And we've identified 10 distinct areas of anomalous noetic experience. And we talk about that potentially today. But we've just launched our pilot survey, and people can go to that www.superexperiencer.org. And we're hoping to launch the full survey by the end of this year. The current survey takes about 10-15 minutes to fill out and just ask people questions about these 10 domains of anomalous experience, like OBEs, NDEs, psychic experiences, psychedelic experiences, UAP encounters, NHI encounters, and so forth. And then, by the end of the year, we're launching the questionnaire that it's probably going to take an hour to fill out. Right? So we're using the results of this initial survey to help us fine-tune our approach to the big survey. And that actually just represents phase one of a multi-phase, multi-year project, which will include brain imaging and subtle energy analysis and in-depth interviews. I also teach a number of courses through my exo-studies platform. So I just recently taught a course on entity encounters where we looked at the 10 most commonly reported types of entities that people experience interacting with: fairies, aliens, angels, demons, ghosts, Bigfoot, cryptids, dogman, egregores, and sentient myths. So we had a lot of fun kind of exploring, all the different types of beings that people experience and the similarities and differences across those categories. And currently, I'm just finishing up a course on the top 10, theories or hypotheses as to who are flying the UAPs. And so we look at, Keel's ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, the breakaway civilization, angels and demons hypothesis, Vallée's control system hypothesis, and so forth. So that's been amazing. And then in addition to all that, I'm a coach and consultant for executives working with CEOs and their executive teams. And generally, they don't know about my crazy UFO interests and my entity encounters experiences and stuff. So I kind of live this double life. Not that I try and keep them separate. It just seems like that's kind of how it is. And as you mentioned, I'm a long-term practitioner in multiple contemplative traditions, the magical traditions, and a number of non-dual traditions, and always trying to kind of weave together the insights from them. So great to be here. Excited to dive in.
Yeah, and I maybe some of those CEOs are actually like CEOs of Skunkworks, and they actually know they're trying to tap you for non-human
Good.
intelligence, technology, inspiration, right?
Awesome. Yeah, that's my hope, that my coaching consulting work will kind of integrate those two worlds.
Yeah. Uh, well, you mentioned a lot there, and just for people listening, I want to give a little bit of the lay of the land in a sense. So, briefly, I just want to set some definitions, right? Um, just very briefly, what would you describe as exo studies?
Yeah, exo studies is kind of a meta integrative approach to the UAP domain in its expanded paranormal context. And by meta integrative approach, I mean I'm looking at it from kind of psychological and contemplative perspectives, biological and environmental systems theories perspectives, and cultural sociological perspectives, right? So kind of taking an interdisciplinary approach to the phenomenon. So as I mentioned, kind of engaging the phenomenon from these major categories. And in fact, in the article Our Wild Cosmos, one of the appendices, I list 150 disciplines that I draw on for exo studies, and I organize them by three major categories. One is kind of the philosophical and academic literature. One is the UFO or UAP and space studies literature. And one is the kind of esoteric and contemplative development literature. And within each of those three categories, there's, 30 to 50 major distinct disciplines that I think are important to be in conversation with, because all of those give some insight into how we might understand or think about or approach the phenomenon. So it's this kind of big integrative map, aimed at UAP and paranormal realities, all in an effort to just really understand the nature of, reality, capital R.
Yeah, and you mentioned noetic experiences. So can you also just define that
Yeah.
for people?
Yeah, so I often talk about anomalous and noetic experiences, and in some ways, those can be interchangeable and or somewhat synonymous with each other. I sometimes use them to distinctly refer to, like, the anomalous experiences are more kind of what we would think of as the weird experiences, the paranormal, the psychic, the psychedelic, the things that kind of make us question the nature of physical reality. Noetic experiences refers more to kind of contemplative experiences of unity, non-duality, oneness, powerful experiences of love. So noetic experiences are kind of what you tend to associate more with the contemplative traditions, whereas the anomalous experiences you tend to associate more with the magical and esoteric traditions. But when you get into it, you start to realize that anomalous experiences are noetic in many cases, and noetic experiences sometimes are anomalous. So whenever you start labeling things, you always get into trouble because there's always examples that spill over the category. But yeah, so noetic and anomalous are kind of used in those ways in the research that I do.
Yeah, and what does any of this have to do with UAP? What does this have to do with crafts and bodies and
Yeah.
UFO cover up, and how do these relate?
Yeah, so this is one of the big divisions you see across UAP studies is you kind of have the tech and nuts and bolts approaches, and then you have the conscious approaches, and never the two shall meet. And it's
Yeah.
interesting, you actually go into the different hypotheses like the crypto terrestrial, breakaway civilization, or that you often find variants within those hypotheses that kind of split out along the lines of kind of the tech, nuts and bolts, flesh and blood, and the more kind of energetic, spiritual consciousness, other dimensions kind of. So you see this kind of binary showing up over and over again. What I love about the phenomenon and why I bring kind of a meta-integrative approach to it is it feels like it spills over the category of nuts and bolts, and it spills over the category of consciousness and energy and awareness. And it really, it's kind of an invitation for us as a global society to kind of better integrate those two sides of kind of the matter and mind division, or as Kripal will refer to, the radar and the revelation, or the inside and the outside. So for me, the phenomenon, one of its core characteristics is what I call doubleness. And this is in part inspired by the work of Kripal. But it's this notion that the phenomenon is often expressing itself in contradictory ways, right? Where it feels like it's both inside and it's outside. It's about me and it's about them. It's about time and space being distorted and dilated. And so there's all these ways in which the phenomena is very paradoxical and contradictory. And I think actually, you can focus on the phenomenon just through the nuts and bolts and the tech side and the bodies and flesh and blood, the biologics. And I mean, that's a game changer, for sure. That's the smoking gun that we're waiting for. And yet I also have the concern that given we live in a largely secular, reductionistic, scientific materialist kind of space globally, that, the danger with those smoking guns kind of being rolled out at some point, hopefully soon, is that it's going to be hijacked by the scientific materialist worldview and kind of reduce the phenomena to, oh, see, we have craft. Oh, see, we have bodies. Like, this is the phenomenon. And I think it's going to, kind of create a dynamic where it'd be easier for the kind of scientific side of the conversation to ignore and avoid the consciousness side of it. But I think if you look at almost any UFO encounter or event, including interactions with non-human intelligences, or what I call alternate human intelligences, because many of these beings we're interacting with are actually humans or very human-like. And so it's a bit of a misnomer to always think of them as non-human intelligences. Dolan, for instance, points out in his book, The Alien Agendas, that, the most commonly reported encounter is with humans, that
Yeah.
seem to be, either galactic humans or breakaway civilization humans, or humans in some sense that, is distinct from Earth humans. And in my article, Our Wild Cosmos, I also, in my kind of meta-analysis of 12 sources, also realized that humans, galactic humans or alternate humans, are the most commonly encountered aliens or ETs that occur in the literature, right? So I think any interaction with UFOs or ETs almost always involves consciousness, right? And some, perception, cognition, memory, missing time, bilocation, things pop, so I don't think we can really have a full understanding of the phenomenon without really including consciousness as kind of foundational to our inquiry and exploration. So for me, the consciousness piece is paramount, and it's why I get excited about UAP studies, because I think it has this opportunity to kind of the phenomena is forcing us to try and reconsider our kind of dogmatic views of science and our dogmatic views of psychology, and it's asking us to come to this higher order of consideration of how matter and mind co-penetrate each other. And I think the phenomena keeps demonstrating that, keeps kind of teasing us, right? With like, how do these two things come together? So yeah, and that's why I'm so excited that we've just launched this UAP and Conscious Studies concentration, because I think that's where the action is. As much as I'm excited for, Gary Nolan, and others to roll out the scientific studies of the biology and chemistry and, metamaterials analysis, that it just seems that consciousness is really kind of primary here in many, many respects.
Yeah, and a lot of times I say that, I really appreciate the UFO UAP phenomena because it's like a bridge between physics and metaphysics,
Yeah,
because you have
totally.
apparent physical objects that
Yeah,
are recognized within our modern physics, and
right.
you can, it has measurable, again, the biological effects that's discussed. Uh, you can capture them on radar and gun camera footage, yet they're demonstrating things that, attributes that we would consider metaphysical at the same time.
Yeah.
So again, as you said, it's like an invitation almost to reconsider how or why that is.
Yeah, and
Um,
like in your recent conversation with Daniel Ingram, you talked about how UFO encounters often stimulate psychic capacities and paranormal abilities. Right? So this is another example of how interaction with a phenomenon tends to activate our subtle body systems, Kundalini awakenings, energetic states of being and embodiment, and then that translates into abilities, telekinesis, and where we're actually adjusting and interacting with matter in interesting ways, or even like in Kripal's work, looking at a lot of the kind of precognitive, interesting time loop stuff that occurs. And when you look at the history of like the hypotheses as to what's going on with UFOs, the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, kind of dominated the discourse, from the beginning. But you have people like Hynek and Vallée and Keel and others who, come around and go, there's more going on here than to be flesh and blood beings and technical craft. That the paranormal and the high strangeness is just foundational to the phenomena. And then, Jacques Vallée's keynote address at the Soul Foundation last year, his big message was, if we want to understand the phenomena, that's where, we're going to get a better understanding of what this is all about, right? Scientific, technological, kind of nuts and bolts, flesh and blood. I think we're missing out on, a big opportunity to really reconsider our understanding of the nature of reality.
yeah, and I'm actually going to be doing a presentation soon on non-human intelligences and subtle energy, um,
Oh,
because
nice.
yeah, I mean, it's going to be very basic. I'm going to do it in two parts. Probably the first is going to be informal, second practical. If I ever get around to it with my crazy schedule, but uh, that's the subtle energy aspect that you mentioned is very interesting. And again, what maybe Jacques Vallée would call post-contact effects.
Right.
You have people even like Uri Geller reporting that his abilities started coming online after he had a UAP encounter
Yeah.
as a child, and you see this time and time again. Um, why do you think that occurs?
Yeah, this is actually, I'm so glad you asked that, because this is like where I spend a lot of my time thinking about this question. And kind of my expertise in this domain is really around subtle energies, the subtle bodies, and the inner senses, and the role that our chakra system and esoteric anatomy play in the perception, manifestation, and experience of these phenomena. And it's a big reason why I'm doing the Super Experiencer research project. It's my way of trying to shine a light on this question of like, what's the relationship between subtle energies and people's experiences of these phenomena? Because over and over again, I see evidence in the literature and in my own experience and talking with experiencers that our subtle anatomy plays a big role in all of this. And you know, and then also why I look at the magical traditions and the contemplative traditions to look at their maps and their practices of how you cultivate the cities and the powers and these psychic abilities. Because I want to understand, when we are focused on an intentional religious or spiritual tradition and develop these abilities, then so that's kind of doing it through practice. And then, as you're pointing out, a lot of people are having this happen just spontaneously through these encounters and events. So I study the esoteric, magical, and contemplative traditions and how they cultivate these powers, and through the development of the body, through the mind, through working with the subtle energies, so that I can better understand what are the mechanisms at play in the spontaneous development of these abilities through UAP and NHI encounters and events. And one of the models I work with is coming out of Kurt Leland's work and kind of a neo-theosophical tradition, is that we have 9 bodies. We have a physical body, and then we have 8 subtle bodies of increasing kind of frequency and subtleness. And so there's, just to name the first few to give people a sense of what I'm talking about, because many of us are kind of familiar with some of these maps. There's the physical body, there's the etheric body, there's the astral body, there's the mental body, the causal body, and the buddhic body. So these are, the first set of bodies that most of us, in most cases, are kind of working with in one way or another. And then there's a set of higher bodies for those who develop the ability to actualize those. And it appears that each of these bodies has its own chakra system, right? So if we use the Hindu system of the 7 chakras, there are 7 chakras in the etheric body, and there are 7 chakras in the astral body, and there are 7 chakras in the mental and causal body. I mean, in a sense, it's the same chakra, but it's like each chakra has its etheric, astral, mental, and causal and buddhic body expression. And that when you're in a body, when you're in an etheric body, you're only going to, depending on which chakras are activated and integrated into that subtle body system, you're only going to be able to see and interact with beings connected to the etheric realm, and likewise with the astral and so part of why certain people interact and see certain beings is they're tapping into, either intentionally or spontaneously, or just through the energetic realities of for instance, the UAP or the NHI. It kind of pops us into different bodies in a sense, right? It kind of activates that frequency in us and activates certain chakras within that bodily system. And then we have certain experiences based on that, right? So, if you have if you're in the astral realm, like you're having an out-of-body experience and you're interacting with a being and you're talking to it and it's not talking back, that likely indicates that your throat chakra in the astral body is not activated. Because if it was, you would be able to have communication with that being, right? Or if you show up in an astral realm, like an astral city, and there's no one in the city, that's probably an indication that your heart chakra in that astral body is not open, because if it was, then you would see and perceive other beings, right? So there's different capacities of experiencing and navigating these realms that are linked to certain abilities associated with different chakras. So I'm in the process of trying to map that out and understand that, so that when we look at situations where, like, 3 people have a very similar but different experience of a UAP event, that we can better understand what's going on, because, oh, well, this person, it activated their etheric body and they had this kind of experience in relationship to it. This person's astral body seemed to be activated, and this person's buddhic body seem to be activated, right? So those are the kind of distinctions and explorations I'm interested in, because when you look at how often an out-of-body experience is associated with a UAP event, right, that it really highlights that there is this subtle dimension in many cases. And in some cases, like with abduction, I have no doubt that there are physical abductions, but it also seems that many of them are subtle realm abductions where the subtle body is taken out of the physical body. So anyways, it's, I think a big key for me around the phenomenon and the variety of experiences is around better understanding our subtle body systems and how they enable us to access different layers and aspects of the phenomenon in these events and encounters.
Yeah. And I've had a whole kind of range of experiences with a lot of this as well. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Um, but I do want to bring it down a little bit because there's
Yeah.
going to be people here that are watching that have seen Lou Elizondo on you know CNN talking about UAPs, and UAPs exist and they're a new wave of UAP researcher, right? They might not have studied in the contemplative traditions like me or you, or or maybe they're not practitioners. So this might be the first time that they're hearing subtle body,
Right.
astral body. I mean, they might have heard about the astral body from like astral dreaming or some kind of new age idea out there. Um, but I really wanted to ground this with people in a very literal and very real way. Because I think you're exactly right in everything that you're saying. So it, to bring this down a little, like what I say, I'm some random schmuck like I am. I see a UFO, right? Why the hell am I spontaneously now having precognitive dreams and seeing orbs in my house?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the main questions, and I don't think we have a good answer to it. I mean, I have some ideas, and I'll share those, but I think this is what's so fascinating. It's like, why would just the visual sighting of a craft, why would that kind of activate a series of anomalous experiences and capacities, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? Like, I see an elk in the forest, and I don't then thereafter start having anomalous experiences, right? Or or
Yeah.
if I see like a Goodyear blimp going across over the sky as part of a festival downtown, and I've never seen a Goodyear blimp in the sky before, but I know what it is when I see it, and I go, oh wow, that's cool. I don't then thereafter start having anomalous experiences, right? So like, what is it about the visual sighting? And I think this is one of the things for us to consider is like, and what I want to get to in the super experiencer research, like, how close does the encounter need to be to activate these experiences, right? So how often would people just have like a kind of a CE1 or 2, like lights in the sky, or they see a craft, right? How often does that result in anomalous experiences versus a CE3 where there's actual beings are seen but at a distance, versus a CE4 where there's an abduction experience, and or CE5 where it's intentionally called in, right? So do we, like, is there a relationship between proximity of encounter with the activation of these paranormal and psychic abilities? I suspect there is, because my working hypothesis, and this is kind of my answer to your question, is that the sighting is somehow activating our subtle bodies and our energetic system, right? And if the sighting is actually like a visual sighting, one question would be, did we see it with our physical eyes, or did we see it with our second sight or our third eye or some kind of psychic vision? Because often psychic vision can actually feel like real vision, right? Like it, like for instance, sometimes when people see a ghost, like a deceased loved one, they will report that for all intents and purposes, their experience of seeing this person was not ghostly, but they experienced it as like they thought it was a flesh and blood person, right? That they seem solid, right? So there are qualities of psychic vision that kind of look like normal vision. So one thing, so if we're having a psychic vision of a craft, even if it's far away, and somehow the craft has activated our psychic ability to perceive it, that might be the catalyst for then a series of psychic capacities to kind of come online for either a short period of time or for a long period of time. So this is another question in the research we're trying to get at. After an event of a UFO or NHI encounter, how long, when people report that they've had psychic and paranormal phenomena occur thereafter, for how long does it last? And does the length of how long it lasts correlate with the proximity of the encounter? And it seems that people who have closer and more intense encounters have more intense and longer lasting paranormal capacities, sometimes brought on somewhat permanently, in many cases, right? So I think this is one of the interesting areas to explore and understand, some of these variables and kind of, how are they interfacing with each other?
Yeah. And I mean, I hope it's not lost on people that, a lot of the people maybe into UAP research are, um, kind of looking at a lot of the national security UAP stuff that's going on. And that's great, right? It gets people's attention, it gets people alert to UAP as a reality. But I would suggest that the stuff that you're talking about right now is probably a lot of the stuff that the Invisible College is actually interested in, not the stuff
Yeah,
that we see
yeah,
on the surface on the news and the stuff that we
right.
see out there. These are the conversations that happen in those circles. Just that's a heads
Well,
up for people.
yeah, and also, I mean, just let's talk about Lou for a moment, right? His
Yeah,
amazing book just came out, and in that book, he talks more about his remote viewing experiences and training than anywhere else. In the past, he's just kind of, acknowledged or alluded to it, but hasn't said much as far as I remember. But in the book, he really kind of, puts it on the table, right? So there's an example of him being a very nuts and bolts, technical, tactical, get shit done kind of guy, and then he discovers he has kind of a natural native, as many of us do or would if we tried, remote viewing capacity. So that he then used that in a number of situations. And the story about him and his buddies using their remote viewing capacities to kind of scare and interrogate a terrorist, suspect or individual, and that individual experienced them as kind of, angel-like, harassers, right? With like these five energy beings showed up and scared the
yeah,
shit out of them. And, so it's like, so even here with Lou, who's like as kind of on the ground and, no bullshit, like let's be, really grounded and real about this. Even he is talking about these things, right? And you have to wonder, like, when you look at, James Lasky and the Skinwalker at Pentagon, and just, the research into, how is it the ATIP program and the ISAP program, ATIP was focused more on kind of the UAP stuff and OSAP more on Skinwalker Ranch, but like the paranormal is right there, right? And if you read James Lukaski's two books, like they're incredible to recognize the intersection between consciousness and the paranormal and the technical nuts and bolts, right? And a lot of people report that the ETs, by whatever label we might use to describe them, are often flying their craft using their consciousness,
yeah,
right? So I think there's a way in which there's a level of intersection between matter and mind that we don't yet understand or appreciate, where the nanotechnologies that are used to engineer these craft and create these interfaces between consciousness and kind of, technology. And we're starting to get glimpses of it with like, Elon Musk's, implants and, just some of the cyborgish, stuff that we're just on the cusp as a Earth civilization. And so, you just can kind of run that out, a couple thousand years and start to imagine the machine mind interface capacities that, we might be capable of here on this planet, and what some of these advanced, technologies and civilizations might already have, kind of mastered on some level. right? And even with like the crash retrievals, when you look at the crash retrievals, so many of them do have this paranormal or kind of conscious dimension to it. Like even Roswell. Sometimes I've heard who was the guy that founded the debrief? Tim.
Tim McMillan.
Yes, thank you, Tim McMillan. I remember him talking about someone told him that
Yeah.
basically the craft at Roswell was a kind of cognitive manipulation machine, that like distorting our perception, and so you seem to have this a lot, so I think it's, as much as there's probably kind of the materialist um, faction of UAP researchers that kind of really want this only to be about tech and nuts and bolts and biologics, like I think it's so quickly going to snowball into some of these other dimensions. Even though I'm sure there'll be camps and kind of speaking bad about each other, like that just seems to be what we do as humans. But I think the phenomena is so thoroughly technologically and consciousness based, at least in the context of UAP phenomenon, that you're not going to get far with one without the other. And I think, and I've heard people say this is part of the challenge of the reverse engineering efforts, and why in some cases they probably haven't been that successful, because they're trying to approach it primarily from kind of a mechanical, technological, electromagnetic perspective, and they're not appreciating or including the consciousness science side of it, because we probably can't reverse engineer any of it without a deeper appreciation of consciousness and its role with these technologies.
Yeah, and again, not because people might take this comment in the kind of biological way, but in the consciousness aspect of it, even the late Philip Corso said that he thought that the missing part of the technology they were missing was the being, right?
Right.
Was
Yeah.
to pilot
Right.
the craft. Not
Yeah.
so much like the yeah, of course the being is a physical entity or whatever as far as we can tell, but because the entity's consciousness was allegedly or potentially guiding the craft, and that
Exactly.
was the missing component.
And this is why Kripal's work is so exciting, right? His focus on our superhumanities, our superpowers, our these paranormal cities, and him trying to normalize and highlight that this is just part of being human, right? That we all potentially are mutants, and in the Professor X sort of way, or even my research on super experiencers. One of the things that keeps showing up is there's a lot more super experiencers than I ever imagined. People are having profound ongoing experiences across 5, 6, 7, 8 of the major categories of the 10 that we're researching. And initially I kind of thought, oh, maybe there's some, that have that, maybe some people have 3 or 4 categories. People who are filling out the pilot survey are demonstrating that, that there's a lot of people who are having these kinds of experiences across a lot of different domains. And so, yeah, the being is the missing piece. It's the biotech, right? And the consciousness of those beings. And this is why our ability to activate, cultivate, and develop and understand our own capacities as humans, as embodied humans, for these kinds of abilities of working with our mind and concentrating and focusing, that is probably very essential to helping to understand some really key elements of the UAP phenomenon.
Yeah, and you know this yeah, I wish we had another like 5 hours because
I
you
know, but
got
I'll
me.
come back. You just invite me again, and we'll go at it one more time.
Yeah, I mean, well, we definitely have to plan a long form discussion sometime because there's so many different directions I want to go in right now. Um, but for one, right now, you mentioned super experiencers, and that you have this study. Um, let's get a bit more into the super experiencer element. Um, yeah, but just to preface that, I just want to dispel the idea that super experiencers are somehow like elitish, because this theme is going to come up. Um, Gra- Grant Cameron has used the terminology UFO Messiah.
Mm.
So I want to dispel any kind of exclusivity.
Yeah. Yeah, for
because I
sure.
think that it can be divisive and so on. And I think that actually doesn't need to be part of the conversation within that. But with super experiencer, we're just discussing a phenomena that is circumstantial, in my opinion, and that for whatever the reason, these individuals are displaying these kind of effects. So, again, just to get to the theme and the idea of super experiencer, uh, what um, what's going on with that?
Yeah, and just to add to the important point you made around like this isn't being presented or framed in like an elitist context, right? The point is we all are potentially super experiencers, right? This is what Kripal's saying. This is what so many of the contemplative and esoteric traditions, like we as embodied beings with consciousness, we all have the capacity to have telepathic experience, precognitive dreams, encounters with entities, to move matter with our mind, right? Like it's like if you look at the traditions, it's just like it's kind of just part and parcel to being human. But we live in a society and in a materialistic, secular, agnostic, kind of, reductionist, mainstream culture that's so connected with consciousness in general that it's even more disconnected with our potential inherent, superpowers as individuals, right? And so, Kripal highlights, the superhumanities. And so super experiencers is just kind of like, building on that lineage of thinking and understanding. And so everyone and anyone is a super experiencer, right? So a super experiencer is defined currently by me as someone who has, 5 or more types of anomalous experience. And there's 10 major categories of experience. And so let me, just since we're on the topic, let me go through it. I mentioned it kind of briefly at the beginning of the conversation, but since we're having this conversation now, I think it's worth kind of circling back. And these categories are not mutually exclusive. Often an experience that falls in one simultaneously falls in another. But they do tend to represent the 10 major kind of domains that you find in the literature and people use to kind of understand and make sense of their experience. So there are out-of-body experiences, right, that people have. There are near-death experiences. And often those are the same. Often you have to be out of body to have a near-death experience, right? But not all out-of-body experiences are a near-death experience. But like, so that's an example of like 2 distinct categories where there's a lot of overlap. Psychic experiences. So just kind of typical ESP, telepathic, seeing auras, that kind of thing. Psychedelic experiences, either through the ingestion of, a substance, the sacred medicine, as it were, or sometimes people have psychedelic experiences spontaneously, or just through intense physical activity or something, right, or fasting, or and then there's encounters with NHIs, non-human intelligences. And here, for me, non-human intelligences is not just what we think of as in terms of ETs or what I call exoterrestrials, but it's the full range of beings that are encountered in many, many contexts. Then we have noetic dreams. Here's that word noetic again. So noetic dreams are like having a shared dream with someone where like both of you seem to be having the same dream, and then you're later able to confirm that, or precognitive dreams, or just like a powerful teaching dream that felt like it was a different kind of dream. Or like a dream where you're talking with your dad who died 2 years ago, and it kind of felt like it was actual some kind of visitation. And then you have paranormal experiences, which can be more like poltergeist events and, kind of weird bilocation stuff, or aports, things disappearing from your desk and then later showing up on your dresser, like your keys or a ring. Then you have UAP events, and then you have mystical events, which are again kind of those noetic experiences that are described in kind of more traditional religious, spiritual contexts, meditative experiences. And then you have permeable self experiences, which are, like channeling, automatic writing, possession by a negative or positive being, and things like that. Bob Faulkner's work on The Others Within Us is like really amazing recent book on and looking at, the permeable self. So these are the 10 categories. And so a super experiencer operationally is defined for the research as anyone who has five experiences that fall into five or more of those categories, right? And part of what we're wanting to do is to understand, why some people have that and why others don't, because the view that I hold is we're all capable of that. So the research is really designed really in the absolute contrast to an elite agenda, but a democratization agenda. Like by understanding those who, for whatever reason, have activated or have access to this wider range of anomalous and noetic experiences, if we can better understand how that happened, what are the mechanisms of that, what's the biology, chemistry,
Right.
brain structure, practices, biographical details that have led that, then we can develop training programs and understandings about anyone who wants some of these experiences or more of these experiences, or how to manage or and work with these experiences, because sometimes this is overwhelming, right? When you have ongoing experiences across these categories, it can be too much. So then what are the mechanisms of modulating and reducing or getting rid of these kinds of experiences? Because sometimes people will have these big openings and then it's too much, and then they'll shut it down. And then that's a totally appropriate and fair response of just like, go away, I don't want this, like this is too much, right? And and often that kind of intention seems to work, but so it's more about exploring the full range of human embodiment and what our consciousness is capable of, and understanding that so that we can support people in kind of spiritual emergency situations like your recent conversation with Daniel Ingram, and also for people who want to cultivate and develop these abilities, or people who have just having these show up, we can help them make sense of it and give guidelines and pathways of how to work with it, either to amplify it or to de-escalate it, right? So that's really the core intention of the research.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to what comes forward with that. Do you have a like an action plan for that timeline uh
Yeah.
of
Yeah. So, basically the current kind of approach is, we're in phase one, which is the global survey. And we have the pilot survey up on the website, superexperiencer.org. And, we're getting, a lot of information from that. We're going to use that to help refine the formal survey, which we want to launch by the end of this year. And that has about, 400 questions in it. But depending on which buckets of experiences you've had will determine which, kind of set of questions you get. So if you've had experiences in all 10 categories, then you're going to get like all 500 questions. If you've only had experiences in three or four of them, you're going to get like, 150 questions. So the length of the survey is going to kind of be dynamically related to how many different types of experiences have you had. And then this survey will be ongoing, but in about a year and a half, then we're going to start doing in-depth interviews with people selected out of phase one, right? So we're going to look at the individuals and find the most interesting cases. And that doesn't necessarily mean the people who've had the most experiences, right? There's a lot of different ways to kind of understand interesting, right? But like we want to look at, kind of the different examples that people are giving and the different kinds of experiences and the different combination of experiences. And then we want to select out, 100, 150 people and do in-depth, 6 to 8 hour interviews with them to better understand all the details around those experiences, or maybe a subset of the experiences. That phase will take 2 years or so. Then the final phase is going to be the brain imaging and subtle energy analysis, right? Where we'll do, MRIs and EEGs and, subtle energy analysis to try and understand the esoteric anatomy behind some of this, and the kind of the biological, genetic, and brain structure dimensions of this as well. And so then that'll be a subset of those who have been interviewed. And there'll also be, probably a dozen psychometric assessments that are done as part of phase two, as well, right? So it's a 6 year, kind of plan with these 3 phases, each phase kind of a 2 year window of activity. And also we want to have an online database that's open to people to search, kind of similar to what like Jeffrey Long's done with, NDEs, and there's a couple great psychedelic databases, right? So that, so that this information, anonymously, available, or aspects of it can be available to the public. And then for other researchers who want to get access to the actual data, there'll be a process they can go through to apply for that and get approval to access it, so that more people can look at the data and do analysis and research on what is this telling us.
Yeah, and so in regards to experiencers, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit here. But I think that's fascinating. Um, and I have some thoughts to share privately on that.
Yeah,
Uh,
great.
uh, but we have again this the kind of UAP disclosure national security narrative at this time. It's it's all over, right? It's the headline. It's getting a lot of people interested in the subject. It's making a lot of people alert, but it's also dominating the conversation a bit. So what do you think can help mm, the conversation move forward in a way like some of the stuff that you're talking about in that kind of work and experiencers, um, and so that kind of thinking or conversations not drowned out by the national security uh, narrative of UAP.
Yeah, it's tricky because I think a lot of people are concerned about the threat narrative, right? And some of the critiques of Lou's book, is that he's amplifying the threat narrative. I don't feel he's doing that in a fear-mongering way. I feel he's doing it in a professional, honest, legitimate way. I mean, I think there are concerns, there's safety issues, there are national security dimensions to this. So I don't have a problem with how Lou is framing things and approaching things, but obviously others in, the military industrial complex are going to go at this from, a national security frame almost entirely, and they're using that, as basically the basis for the secrecy and the cover up. Yeah, I think this is kind of a confusing aspect of where we're at in the UAP kind of community, right? Because I think we're going to be stuck with the threat narrative and this contingency of people who are going to lead with that and emphasize that. And in many ways, it looks like it's kind of driving the disclosure process as well as kind of preventing it, right? So there's this weird tension between that
Yeah.
narrative is driving the disclosure and it's also what's obstructing the disclosure, right? And so much of the news cycle is oriented around that, and this other piece around conscious experiences, psychic capacities, entity encounters, other than kind of a straightforward biological kind of event, is really still kind of seen as craziness, right? But when you look at some of the people like Valet is pointing to that, Greipel's pointing to that, Diana Pasulka's pointing to that, Lou even in his own way is pointing to that, right? So many of our leaders in the space, Grant Cameron points to that, Whitley Street, like it's just like, so it's interesting, this tension, right? And I think this is what's so fascinating about the UAP topic and engaging it, is like, how do we keep building bridges between those two narratives and those two communities and those two kind of factions of people? And also, how do we make the military kind of trajectory kind of a healthy version like Lou's? Like I find Lou's perspective kind of like the healthy version of that approach, right? Like it raises the issues, it highlights them, it's not overemphasizing them. He often does kind of reframe it as this isn't just a national security thing, this is a humanity issue, and his whole reason for going public is because it's like people need to know this, right? So I think he has a sensitivity to kind of both sides of it, even though he's kind of more associated with the military kind of threat narrative aspect. So I think we have to support people like Lou, who actually kind of have a good head on their shoulders, are able to speak that language, speak truth to power in that context, but also are sympathetic and open and have skin in the game with kind of the other side of the conversation, right? And I think, Chris Mellon and others also kind of have that appreciation. right? So my hope is that, we keep finding dynamic ways to kind of hold that tension, right? Of, the kind of the military dimensions of this, um, and also the kind of more, paranormal consciousness, high strangeness aspects. But in a sense, it's the core tension of modernity, right? It's like consciousness, mind, psychology, spirituality, and technology, military, matter, science, right? Like, so I think we're kind of up against this isn't just in the UAP context. Like this, in a sense, is one of the major kind of thresholds as a global civilization we're facing, right? Like, how do we get past this kind of scientific reductionistic, tech-driven, military driven approach to reality and and global citizenship, right? I think the UAP topic kind of amplifies it in a particular way, and in some ways I think might be the one thing that actually can potentially push us to reconcile it in a new way, right? Like it, because it's so out of the box, it's so disorienting, it's so in your face, it's so, there's so much ontological shock, scientifically, technologically, biologically, consciousness, spiritually, like it's just kind of like across the board, it's kind of a game changer, right? But also in that, I think there's the risk that it might be too much too fast. And we might see people locking down with the threat narrative, right? Out of because often there's this sense of like, oh, we're going to hit this tipping point, like climate change and economic issues, and and then that's going to be this catalyst for people going to the higher level of what's possible as a human, right? Getting along with our neighbors. But the sociological research actually shows that under that kind of stress, people de-evolve, people go into egoic dynamics, people become more territorial, people become more defensive and worried, right? Like so it's like, the UAP disclosure process in all of its glory could be so shocking to so many layers of society globally that we kind of have a regression of sorts, in terms of our ability. There's this idea like, oh, like kind of the Reagan quote, this is the thing that can unite us. I don't think so. I mean, yes, in principle, I get that, but to me, the psychological and sociological data suggests the opposite is just as likely, if not more likely, that this thing is going to divide us, right? Yes, for some sections of society, it will be the thing that kind of takes us to a higher order of humanity. I think for many sections, it's going to have us drill down and double down on positions that are egoic, not helpful, problematic, aggressive, dismissive, right? And so, we're going to have a weird situation where, like let's say disclosure happens tomorrow in some dramatic sense. Like, I think like 30% of the global population are going to like meet the challenge and go to this higher order place of connectivity and like, wow, like, okay, let's connect. I think 70% of the global population is going to go WTF and just like go, man, this is too freaky, this is too like, whatever. And we're going to like see levels of polarization that make, American politics look, kind of like a day at the beach.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think everything that Lou is doing, he's doing very well. I think he really put himself out there and put himself on the line, and has done and is doing a great service for this cause. And I think it's necessary. Without everything that him and Christopher Mellon and others have done, we wouldn't be at this point.
Yeah.
Uh, so some of what you were just touching on was part of a conversation I had with Jim Semivan
Yeah.
recently. We had a real long talk, uh, and this theme came up of indigestible.
Yeah.
Uh, so, and I know we only have a few minutes left here. Uh, when it comes to, we have somebody that who is a super high level in the intelligence community, like Jim Semivan, who is also an experiencer,
Yeah.
right? Um, and it's always great to hear his perspective. and I love talking to Jim. So what do you make of that comment of indigestible? That because again, in the discussion we had, it wasn't not like we're talking about, there's aliens coming here in a spaceship from another planet, and people can't handle that simple truth. I mean, he was getting more at like whatever this phenomenon represents, constitutes a change in our understanding of the nature of reality, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what do you think of this kind of the question of the indigestible?
I think that's a great word. I think that's a powerful word, and partly because it's so visceral,
Yeah.
right? It's like you've taken something into your body and the body can't break it down and assimilate and use it for healing and growth and energy and movement, right? It's like so I think there's a really powerful communication in that word, and I absolutely agree. And I really love Jim. He's so great, and he's a good example of someone like Lou, who's part of the intelligence community and is an experiencer and is open to and understands the consciousness aspect, right? So I think we need to keep supporting the people who are on the kind of the government IC side of things, who are kind of have healthy views of both the threat narrative and the consciousness side, and like support them to be visible and leaders and in conversation with other people who are part of this process. Yeah, I think and we were just talking about this in one of my public courses on looking at the different UAP hypotheses. And we're in the 8th week out of 10. So we've kind of been week by week going through these different hypotheses. And so recently we were kind of talking about this issue. And one of the ways that it got framed in that conversation is that, are we alone? That question in some ways is like, it pales in comparison, as disclosure, to really coming to terms with the level of government secrecy that's been involved for so long.
Right.
And in a sense, like disclosure is more about that than about, are we alone, right? Right. So it's kind of interesting that we tend to focus on, are we alone as like the spear point of disclosure. I think most of the impact and disorientation of disclosures is not going to be, oh, we're not alone, and we've known that for a while, and we have a craft or two, and we have some bodies. Like that's obviously earth changing and radical. But I think immediately the bigger impact is coming to terms with the government secrecy and the implications of that, right? And then, kind of to your point, and then I think then the even bigger issue is it questions our understanding of what it means to be human, and then it questions and brings into conversation what's the nature of reality, right? So disclosure isn't just, are we alone? It's that plus the government secrecy issue, the nature of what it means to be human, the nature of reality, and the nature of consciousness, right? Like it's just like like it's like all of those are so absolutely indigestible, right? And I think even though it's a bit dated, when you look at the book that Dolan did with Bryce on, AD after disclosure,
Yeah,
and
great
then,
book.
you get the sense of like, wow, like, kind of even in basically a controlled disclosure scenario, like it seems like it's going to be a rough road for 1 to 5 years, right? And economically, educationally, socially, politically, like, and so in that sense, it's going to be indigestible to the nation states and to the geopolitical landscape, right? And to kind of Alex Went's point in the chapter he did for Leslie Kane's book on how basically the national security state can't handle this issue, right? Because it makes the national security apparatus null and void, right? And so it's very existentially threatening to the nation state. And so and then we get into consciousness, death, like the nature of reality, right? So not only is it indigestible on an individual level, even for those of us who are rooting for it, I think when the day comes, like I think we're going to discover it's more indigestible than we realize, right? And then it's indigestible at a collective level, socially and politically, economically, institutionally, right? So I think there's a lot about this topic that is, really overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, there's always the discussion of controlled and or catastrophic disclosure. And Sean, I could be here with you another 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours easily. Uh, but I'm definitely going to invite you back on sometime soon because I like this conversation started. I thought I had in mind maybe like, okay, this is the stuff I want to talk about, and now that's probably multiplied by about 1,000.
Well,
So, um, we're I hope to have you back on soon for a long form discussion. If we
yep,
could
great.
set that up sometime,
Absolutely.
and we got to get together sometime soon too. I mean, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, and
But
I'm going to follow up with you on, our conversation about us co-leading a retreat, right?
yeah,
Where we bring practice and CE5s and, explore this from an embodied experiential way, but also kind of engage some of these bigger questions and issues. Like, I think that could be
yeah,
really confusing.
yeah, because I'm working on that presentation I mentioned on non-human intelligences and subtle energy, and kind of my interpretation of why and how that is.
I'd
And
love to.
also, I'm in the process of writing a book about the nature of interactions with non-human intelligence, and not even just with non-human intelligence, because like, I mean, one thing it gets to the level of that I think is going to be a theme in what I'm writing is that the non-human intelligence interaction is demonstrating and showing you how you're able to communicate with reality itself in a way,
Yeah.
right? That participatory thing is not just bound to the phenomenon, but there's a higher order of interaction going on that's facilitating that,
Yeah.
right? So that's a whole thing. And um, so for people listening, where can they find your stuff?
Yeah,
Uh,
there's a few places. There's the California Institute for Human Science. That's the university I'm connected to. Their email, or rather their URL is, www.cihs.edu. But as you pointed out before we started today, there's some web pages that aren't working because we just launched a new website. So if people go to that in the next few days and find issues, just come back. We're cleaning all that up. So just be patient. But there you can learn about the master's and PhD program in Integral Noetic Sciences and our concentration in UAP and Consciousness Studies, and be part of the super experiencer research. We just had a course this last spring where 12 students helped me create the survey with its 500 questions over 10 weeks. So there's an opportunity for people to actually be involved with kind of on the ground research into these issues. And then you can find out about my public courses at the exo-studies.org website. That's exo-studies.org. Just finishing up, a course now on the 10 top UAP hypothesis. In the new year, I'm going to do a course on the varieties of non-duality. And then after that, I'm doing a course on the 9 subtle bodies.
oh
Right. So there
man,
are a few that are coming up in the next year. And then for my coaching and consulting work, you can go to metaintegral.com. But those first two URLs are probably the ones that are most interesting to most of the listeners here. So James, great to be back with you. Love the depth of consideration and conversation that we're able to have. Love the podcast and always enjoy watching the episodes you've had with other guests. So it's a real honor to be in that lineup. And I absolutely look forward to coming back and having a deep dive, longer exploration of all the things we didn't get to today.
yeah, and again for people watching, if Jeffrey Kripal is Professor X, I've said that right here. Sean Esbjörn-Hargens with the sideburns is definitely Logan. He is the Wolverine of meta studies. So if you're into UFOs and you want to see the Logan of the academics, there he is. Thank you so much, and I hope to speak to you again soon, Sean. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye for now.